Hi, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here today to discuss Gen Z and car shopping and car buying. I'm Jenny Newman. I'm the editor-in-chief of Cars.com. I've been with Cars.com for 16 years now. I started in an entry-level role in editorial. Today, I manage our team of automotive journalists. I'm also a World Car juror. I'm an owner of an EV, and I have 2 Gen Zers at home, so I'm living this life quite a bit.
And I'm Amy Lindas. I'm Director of Research and Insights at Cars.com. My team focuses on a variety of dealer and consumer research projects. And part of that, I study the consumer journey during the car buying process and how that differs among different buying segments. Now, I don't have an EV, I don't have a hybrid, I have a gas-guzzling V8, but I do have Gen Z and millennial children.
So we're here to talk today about Gen Z, but before we do, oops, we've got the clicker, right?
Yes.
Yes, we got to coordinate everything here. We wanted to just talk a little bit about the generations. So Gen Z, as some of you may know, they were born between 1997 and 2012, so that means they're ages 12 to 27. Now, for the purposes of our discussion today, we're focusing on those who are 18 to 27-year-olds, so on the adult side rather than the younger side. Millennials, they were born between 1981 and 1996, ages 28 to 43. Now, I think a lot of us have been talking about millennials for years and years. They have been the focus of so much analysis as we try to figure out what their generation was going to do to the marketplace. They've impacted communication styles, entertainment consumption, shopping habits, fashion, so much. There's also the boomer versus millennial rivalry that's been going on for quite a while. Check out your social media to get an OK Boomer clip. But you know, this started when millennials entered the workforce in the early aughts. Now, Amy and myself were Gen X. You might say that we are an elusive generation, often ignored, but many of us Gen Xers are the parents of Gen Z. And so we wanted to take a little bit of a deeper look at Gen Z and compare them to millennials that we do know so much about. So, when it comes to these two groups, let's talk about some of the differences in their upbringing. Millennials, they experienced the 9/11 attacks, the Iraq and Afghanistan war, the 2008 election of the first Black president, Barack Obama. They also experienced a rise in school shootings during their school years. Now, Gen Z, I'm sure we all remember this, it's not that long ago, there was a global pandemic that they experienced. Politically divided environment that we're in right now, social unrest and activism, and regular active shooter drills in their schools.
And when we think about the workforce that these generations were entering, for millennials, they entered the workforce during an economic recession. Many of them were saddled with student debt, so this resulted in a slow start that really affected their long-term financial choices. Now, older Gen Zs, they entered the workforce during the pandemic where remote work and health protocols were the norm. And so for the younger Gen Zs that are just entering the market now, they have the advantage of a much more robust job market, as well as much more flexible options when it comes to working and higher pay.
Now, we can't talk about these generations without discussing technology. It's so much a part of their lives. Millennials, while they grew up, their early years were tech-free, but the internet, cell phones quickly became a part of their lives during their middle school and high school years. Gen Z, it seems like technology has been part of their lives from the minute they arrived. I certainly feel like that with my own kids. The iPhone launched in 2007, and that's when the oldest Gen Zer was 10 years old. By their teens, they had mobile devices, Wi-Fi, high bandwidth cellular service. Those were all commonplace. And of course, social media, constant connectivity, on-demand entertainment. These are all the norms for Gen Z, unlike millennials and those of us who are older who have learned to adapt. So the implications for Gen Z is that they're in this always-on technological environment. It's becoming more evident in their behaviors, their attitudes, and their lifestyles. Now that we understand a key difference between these two groups, let's go to car shopping. With the rise of ride-sharing services and app-loving millennials, there was a lot of early speculation that driving and car ownership would shift. However, Gen Z is seeing the value of car ownership, and they're seeing it early on. Older Gen Zers who are 18 to 27 years old are already car owners, and some are already looking to purchase their second vehicle. Not surprisingly, Gen Z is more likely to have purchased their car in the past 4 years than compared to older generations.
Yeah, that's right, Jenny. Now, this data accounts for 65% of the Gen Z market. We still have 12 to 17-year-olds that haven't even entered the market yet. But there's one thing that's for sure about these younger generations is when they're first starting out, they prefer to purchase used vehicles. And this is highest for Gen Z at 58%. And to be honest, it's not really a surprise if you consider the fact that the average new car price is now hovering around $49,000. So this budget-conscious younger generation is choosing used where the average used car price is around $29,000. Next slide. All right, so Gen Z is new to the market, and they honestly have a pretty steep learning curve to catch up to the experience of these older generations. This always connected generation has a deep well of information to do their research on car shopping, and they'll spend 3 months or longer doing this. And when they're online, Gen Z are primarily visiting dealership websites, they're visiting OEM websites, and they're online accessing expert reviews to get the information that they need. But this generation doesn't completely rely on the internet. In fact, friends and family were the most influential source for Gen Z when they're car shopping. Now, this is really different from millennials who do most of their research on dealership websites.
Also important, we talked about social media. Of course, for this generation, they absolutely use social media as they are doing this research around vehicles. They're also looking at advertising too. So these are two different ways that they're gathering info. I know at cars.com, we have our editorial team, and we offer a lot of our expert insights on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube Shorts, and it's a great way to engage with this audience, and we are seeing really great responses from them and more engagement as well on our site.
Okay, when it comes to concerns around car shopping, Gen Z worries most about finding the right car, and that's similar to millennials. But when we look at older generations, they're worried most about getting a fair price. Now, this isn't to say that Gen Z is not concerned about that, because getting a fair price is their second highest concern.
And this is a valid concern given that most of this generation entered the car shopping market during the pandemic when it was difficult to find vehicles. And in fact, often you had to pay a premium or some sort of overage to even get your hands on a vehicle. So it's understandable. They're making this large purchase. This is likely their first big purchase of their adult life. And we all know the car is the second biggest purchase in a person's life after their home. And so considering that these Gen Zers are just starting off, it's more than likely that this is the biggest thing they've ever purchased. Because of the size of this expense and the lack of experience, Gen Z is reported to have a higher trust in salespeople compared to Gen X and Boomers. The latter has the most mistrust. So I just found that so interesting that the salesperson, that dealership, became an essential tool for Gen Zers.
Absolutely, and we'll hit on that throughout the presentation because that trust element is really key to connecting with Gen Z. All right. So when it comes to car brands, Gen Z is very undecided. They're open to influence. And again, their lack of experience means that they don't have these preconceived notions around car brands. And this is really good news for dealers and OEMs alike because this group is very open to different makes. In fact, 81% of Gen Z shopping on cars.com have not yet decided on their make and model. And remember, this generation is more open to advertising to influence their decisions. The other thing I wanted to mention, when it comes to brands, Gen Z prefers practical, traditional, and trusted brands. When we look at data from new car buyers, So this is new, not used. But Gen Z was more likely than the older generations to purchase Toyota, Kia, Hyundai, Honda, Mazda, and Nissan, which are all very practical brands. Now, while slightly more Gen Zers did purchase an SUV over a car, Gen Zers are more than twice as likely to buy a car, meaning a sedan or a coupe, compared to the older generations. They're far more likely to purchase a compact vehicle, and even when it comes to the SUVs that they're buying small SUVs or they're buying crossovers.
So smaller sedans, maybe an SUV, but they certainly don't want to look like they're driving what their parents drive.
Exactly, exactly.
I understand that. So when you're advertising or speaking with potential shoppers, Gen Z is focused primarily on price, fuel efficiency, and reliability. So they are really looking to get the most bang for their buck. However, in true Gen Z fashion, this generation places a lot of value around tech. I can't say we're surprised. They are interested in Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, more than any other generation. Also, adaptive cruise control ranks high for them. So for those who are dealers or automakers here, definitely play up those tech features with this generation.
Absolutely. And compared to the previous tech-loving generation, millennials are now at that stage in their life where they're mostly in family mode. So they're placing higher importance on safety features, on cargo space, to transport their growing families and all the things that go along with a growing family.
So many things. Okay, are we ready? Can we do next
Oh
slide?
yeah, we can.
Thanks, Amy. So one piece of advice that my team of expert car reviewers always gives to, honestly, any shopper is to get behind the wheel of a car before you make a purchase, right? Seems so basic, but you would be surprised the number of people who maybe don't do that. This is important to any driver in a household to see how, of course, this vehicle is going to feel driving around the city, getting onto the highway, all of these critical spaces. The good news is Gen Z, they're actually heeding this advice. This generation wants a tactile experience. They want to feel, drive, interact with the technology before they complete that final purchase in person. Now, more than any other generation, Gen Z said that they saw their car 3 or more times prior to buying it, which I found astounding. They are making a big choice. This is a big purchase for them. So I think that they need that extra time with the vehicle to just feel secure in that purchase.
Yeah, this isn't a generation who's wanting to buy their car online. This is likely their first car purchase, so they need to experience that. They lack the experience of buying cars in the past. So actually, boomers are more likely to buy the car online because they know exactly what make model they want and they can order it online. They have the experience. All right. So traditional dealerships reign supreme, as I was just referring to, and Gen Z sees these businesses as most trustworthy. Now, online marketplaces like Carvana are more trusted by younger generations, with the highest trust being among millennial, followed closely by Gen Z. But interestingly, Gen Z has much higher trust for independent dealerships compared to older generations, which ties in nicely to the fact that this generation is primarily seeking used vehicles. Now, in a recent study that we had conducted among car shoppers and buyers, when we asked them about the pain points, finding a trustworthy dealer was by far the number one concern. When it comes to the car buyers, obviously we all know building trust is a big concern. And that's true for any generation. This isn't exclusive to just Gen Z.
So let's turn to EVs. So the EV market, we know it's undergone some dramatic transformations over the last few years, evolving from a niche segment to mainstream choices for many consumers. Over the last 5 years, the demand for EVs has surged by an astonishing 930%, and supply is up 825%, but prices are also up. Now, thankfully, that's only two digits, 56%, but of course, we know that these price increases aren't exclusive to EVs. New car vehicle prices have increased across the board. For EVs, this growth is driven by several factors. There's wider range of choices, right? We're seeing EVs as pickup trucks, SUVs, three-row SUVs. We're starting to see EVs in forms that people want to drive. There's also better access to public charging. There's increased awareness and education among consumers. There's state and federal tax incentives and rebates, improvements in battery tech. There's a lot going on in this space. And because of all of this, right, EVs will now become a legit option for Gen Z.
And that's really good news for automakers because Gen Z is more likely than any other generation to say that they'd consider buying an EV. And they rate not paying gas as the biggest draw for this cash-strapped generation that's just entering the workforce. Now, we've all seen the ebbs and flows with EV interest, but one thing is true, when gas prices go up, so does interest in EVs. Now, Gen Z is less likely than other generations to say that tax incentives are a primary motivation for choosing an EV. So it's important to reinforce the saving on gas and EV's environmental impact because those are the key drivers for EV consideration among Gen Z.
Amy, I'm not a Gen Zer, obviously, but I will tell you, it's pretty great to drive past gas stations in your EV, so I can co-sign that.
There's nothing worse than getting in your car, turning it on, empty.
Yeah, right.
When you're late.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Always when you're late. Okay, so we are going to move on to trade-ins. So here's where things get really interesting as far as Gen Z goes. Gen Zers are more likely to say that they were given their car compared to other generations. So this gives Gen Z a leg up because as they get deeper into their careers, workforce, just life in general, they're going to have something to trade in when they're ready to upgrade to a new or new to them vehicle.
Right. And although more Gen Zers are being gifted vehicles, this advantage isn't across the board. There are still a large number of Gen Zers that didn't have a car gifted to them. So when we asked Gen Zers if they plan to trade in their car, there were only 39% that said that they were planning to trade in. So that's not surprisingly lower than other generations.
So I think you're starting to see a trend with Gen Z. They're new to making decisions. They're starting to make these large purchases, and it's important to them to understand all the details that come with it. The initial car purchase, as many of us know, it comes with fees, taxes, and add-ons, and that can be overwhelming for Gen Z. If you throw in a trade-in step, things get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Like millennials, Gen Z don't fully understand what impacts their trade-in value. So this is where those of you that have Cars.com's AccuTrade vehicle valuation tools can print out a vehicle health report and go through that with Gen Zers, go through the details, help them through that process, answer any questions that they might have. It's really important to position yourself as the resource for education and information when it comes to car buying, as well as being that expert on buying and selling cars. Because this generation has trust in the dealerships. So the trust is there, and they're just looking for a little bit of hand-holding. This is their first car purchase of many. And if you can prove yourself to be an ally during that process, they are more likely to return to you in the future for their car buying needs.
Yes, absolutely. And remember, of course, that Gen Z, they do a lot of research. They crave information to help them make these big decisions. They're more than likely to see their car 3 or more times. So it's important for dealers to have some patience as they work with them and provide them with the information and answer those questions as they're returning. We would recommend that you don't push the hard sell because they're nervous about this big purchase. So you want to make sure that you are there to help them grow in confidence as they're moving forward on buying a vehicle. Now, I can't emphasize this enough. You basically, as a dealer, right, you want to be almost like an in-person Wikipedia page or that Q&A source where you can just rattle through the answers for them.
Yeah, 100%. There is a huge opportunity to win a customer for life with Gen Zers. Even those Gen Zers that said that they weren't planning on trading in a car, when we asked them how they would sell their car, the majority of them said to a local dealership. So they really value their dealership's role in the process. But it's not quite a slam dunk because they're also more likely than other generations to say that they'd sell their vehicle on an online marketplace. We all know what a hassle that can be. So it's really important to help them understand the ease, the convenience of selling your vehicle to your dealership. All right, now let's turn to the financial side of the process.
So at Cars.com, our editorial team, we're focused on helping shoppers as they are, getting ready to purchase their next vehicle. And one thing we tell any visitor to our site, whether they're Gen Z or a boomer, is, when it comes to purchasing a vehicle, you want to look at the total cost of the vehicle. Focus on more than the monthly payment, though we know you're also going to be thinking about that monthly payment. Of course, with monthly payments, our advisement is to really be careful on the length of the loan. We don't want to get underwater. You don't want to end up paying, $60,000 for a vehicle that really was $40,000 when you walked in.
Yeah, that's great advice. Your team really has a wealth of knowledge for new car buyers. And what you're telling car shoppers is exactly what Gen Z wants to hear, because they are really focused on that total cost of the vehicle more than their millennial counterparts.
Which is a good thing, right? Because car loan terms we can get them as long as 6, 7, 8 years, which is astounding. That's a long time to be paying off a vehicle, especially when compared to the 4 to 5 year loans that were considered long in my early days of car shopping.
Yeah. I mean, that it really is crazy how long loan terms are getting. And it makes it easier to fall down that trap of getting upside down on your loan. And while Gen Z is looking at the total cost of the vehicle, they, again, don't really understand all of the details that go into the additional fees and what that out-the-door price is, more so than any other generation. And again, we conducted some recent research where Gen Z told us that they find it really difficult to get that out the door price and to understand what additional fees will get added on to that price. So price transparency is a really big deal for this generation because they don't want to be shocked when they get to the final purchase and realize that the actual purchase price is much higher than they were anticipating.
Yeah, this is that opportunity again for that dealership to build that relationship with the car shopper, with this Gen Z car shopper, and guide them through this process.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is why if a dealer can sit with a Gen Z person and explain the total cost of the vehicle, go line by line through the fees, through the taxes, they're more than likely to come away with a positive experience. Gen Z, as we keep saying, they need to have all this information. They're craving the information, and dealers, they can provide that.
Yep, that's right. And while this group is very budget conscious, they're also somewhat aware of what to expect when it comes to a payment. So they're more comfortable with higher payments of $500 a month or even higher. So it's possible that they're comfortable with these higher amounts because they're living at home, or they understand inflation, or they just might not be aware of the fact that the average monthly payment was $300 a month not all that long ago, because all the research that they're doing is telling them to expect to pay at least $500 a month.
That's right. So Gen Z knows that purchasing a car, whether it's new or used, it can be expensive. But some of the elder Gen Zers may have somewhat of an advantage. Remember that this generation entered the workforce during the pandemic, and this means they were probably living at home and able to build up perhaps a cushion of savings if they did it right. That's a big if, but.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, how many of us miss those days of living rent-free with our parents? I probably could have stayed a few more years and built up a nice nest egg. But we're Gen Xers, so we were 30 at age 10. So come 18, we're out and ready to go.
That's right.
But this is why Gen Z, more so than any other generation, says that they're planning to put 16 to 25% down on a vehicle's price. And so the ability to save could be one reason why this generation is able to put down a higher percentage. But it's also that they're just starting out. They're looking for lower value used cars. All right. Now let's turn to Gen Z's preferred method of purchasing. So 37% of Gen Z plan to finance their vehicle or take out a loan. Now that's lower than older generations. And so of those that said that they plan to finance, most say that they're going to take out a loan through their bank. Now that's significantly higher than older generations. But I think that this is, again, an area where Gen Z lacks the experience here. And so this is yet another opportunity to help guide this generation on the benefits of financing through the dealership. Now, Gen Z is more likely than millennials to pay full price in cash for the vehicle. And again, this is because they are looking for lower priced used vehicles and they know that interest rates are high. Now, this is a small portion of respondents, but there's a group of Gen Zs and millennials that say that they're okay borrowing money from family and friends, or that they prefer to lease. And so looking at that lease data, 15% of Gen Zers prefer leasing, and that's higher than any other generation. And research is showing that more Gen Zers are either opting to pay for vehicles in cash when they can, or they're opting to lease. Now, they're doing this at a rate that's 4 times that of Gen X and older generations.
To me, that's fascinating to see leasing coming back so strong with Gen Z. Again, we can talk about maybe the why of that's happening. They're staying with their parents or they're returning to their parents' homes because of the high cost of rent and the difficulty finding housing these days, perhaps because they have student loan debt that they're working through, or it's just a carryover from the days of the pandemic. So that gives them a financial leg up. They do have full-time paychecks, and if they're at home, they've got fewer bills. So most are starting off with a better financial situation than any of the other generations. It's interesting, as we mentioned, it's important to remember that this is for 18 to 27-year-olds from the Gen Z perspective. So we're not talking about the 12-year-olds yet, but soon enough, they'll be in the marketplace and shopping for cars quickly before we know it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is all that we have for you today, but we'd love to open it up to any questions that you may have about the research we presented.
Are there any questions? Oh,
yes.
Over here.
Changing attitudes towards public transportation or mobility services as opposed to owning a vehicle?
So changing attitudes to public transportation or mobility services. Amy, do you have?
Well, you know what's interesting is that the pandemic actually increased people's desire to have their own vehicles so that they didn't have to take public transportation. So I was studying that for a long time in 2020 and 2021. I haven't looked at it in recent years, but it definitely resulted in more people buying something to get them from point A to point B and actually not having to rely on public transportation. So I'd have to look into whether that trend is still apparent, but so public transportation hasn't impacted, but rideshare, now during the pandemic, still, obviously people didn't want to rideshare, but I could see where rideshare would become an area that could potentially take some market share away from vehicle ownership.
Uber just had a huge quarter.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Uber just had a huge quarter. Just so people can hear them.
Yeah.
And I will say, I live in the city of Chicago, and just anecdotally, the public transportation is struggling there to come back. There's issues with reliability. There's issues with how long into the evening or night, public transportation is available. So I think that also plays a part in it. It's a little bit of, is it going to be there when I need it? And also some concerns around safety as well that are part of sort of the broader conversation, at least in Chicago. That's one city, but. It's okay.
Here you go.
But there's a big push in the industry towards subscription-based vehicle use or access.
Yeah.
Do you have any insights on whether people are inclined to subscribe to a car?
So I have seen that higher actually among boomers, where also, so leasing is most interest to Gen Z and to boomers, so not those middle generations. The subscription services are also more appealing to boomers. And to be honest, I mean, those subscription services are pretty pricey. I mean, but you know, there are some great benefits to it. So you're talking like Gen X or boomers that would honestly be able to afford that. But it was in a Mintel study that I was looking at, it did resonate with boomers.
Oh, with the mic coming. Thank you.
So I have a question about the Apple CarPlay. I guess I was quite surprised by how low those numbers were in general. I was wondering if you could comment, like I think it was 11% down to like 4%. I think maybe some of my experience with that data is they're normally like in the 80 to 90% desirable. Could you speak to that, or maybe was that something else you were quantifying there?
Yeah, you know, it's hard when you put something like price with features, because price is just going to by far outweigh those features. But there's no doubt that like Apple CarPlay, Android Auto are among tech features the highest. I mean, as a Gen Xer, it's important to me as well. So I would think certainly Gen Z and millennials. But we do have a lot of different studies asking, you know, where we focus on actual tech features versus safety features like brake assist, lane assist, even the cruise control, adaptive cruise control, which, you know, most people, once they have it, they never want a vehicle without it. So that then becomes important as well. So my point is, I can get back to you on the data where it's segmented out and like price is removed from that, because price throws everything off. Like they're going to select price, but the Android Auto, Apple CarPlay, definitely very important. And I mean, for most, I would say for the vast majority of new vehicles, it's not even really I mean, it's just a given. Now, just 3 years ago, it wasn't, but I think a lot has changed. And I mean, even in the 2021 Chevy Equinox that I got from my daughter, that it had Apple CarPlay.
What's interesting though is some automakers are starting to move away from it.
Really?
So that's an area. So here's our two teams talking together basically. But yeah, so there's automakers who are moving away into their own native systems, or partnering with Google, who's doing something new. So you can find that in Volvo and Polestar, things like that, as well as some GM products. So there are conversations. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out in the market and how much of a factor something like Apple CarPlay becomes. You know, people have really, it is something that we cover, and it's a perennial top favorite story, because people want to quickly see which vehicles have this technology, which of them have it. You know, is it either plugged in or wireless, right? So we know it's important to shoppers. Automakers are making some moves there. Will shoppers follow them? I think that's something we're going to have to watch. Hi.
Regarding Gen Z, I mean, millennials, they're delaying purchasing, they're delaying this because they didn't have money. You talked about going to workplace as a '09. I did that as well. Gen Z, it sounds like, has more money. They're staying at home later. They're probably delaying marriage and purchases, I think, a bit compared to boomers and Gen X. But are they going to delay it as much as millennials did? And are they actually interested in buying a car? Because most people I talk to are Gen Z, are more phone, and that's their freedom than, I mean, a vehicle to get around.
So a couple of things to touch on. I think that it's possible that Gen Z learned a little bit from millennials in terms of their student loan debt. So either they're choosing to stay at home, or they're choosing more affordable colleges, community college, or, you know, going into the trades or something like that to avoid being saddled with that student loan. So those that want to purchase a vehicle, I don't think are delaying it, but you're absolutely right that there are fewer Gen Zs getting their driver's license at age 16, 17 compared to millennials and especially compared to Gen X boomers. So there are some Gen Zers that are definitely delaying the option of getting their driver's license. But again, that also depends on where they reside. Clearly in rural populations, it's not nearly as prevalent as it is in more urban communities. But there isn't the delay that we saw with millennials. Those that can do it are pulling the trigger.
Yeah, was there any preferences that you saw or that you even asked about, like at the dealership level, if they're more comfortable dealing with salespeople closer to their own age versus older?
I think that's a good question. I haven't asked that before, but I would love to. I think that that's fascinating. We have asked, like, do you prefer to go to a dealership that you've been to before? Or how important is it for you to know the salesperson at the dealership? And it's not very important. But asking about having somebody around your age, I will definitely consider that on a future study. And we're launching studies every week, so we can get some data on that pretty quick.
I'll send you a bill.
Any other questions? Oh, yep.
In terms of luxury, you mentioned Gen Z is interested in Hyundai, Kia, Honda. Do you think that's only because of affordability, or do you think they're looking at luxury different, and that may stay with them a little bit later?
I can tell you when it comes to consideration, so when they're looking at what vehicles, when we ask them, what brands are you considering, BMW is number 5. But when it comes to purchasing, BMW didn't make the top 20. So they 100% have luxury aspirations, but the wallet isn't quite funding that purchase yet. But there are many luxury brands in the consideration set.
Question about, basically the purchase triggers. So in other words, I have heard arguments that younger generations are not so affected by exterior styling. It's more the interior interface and so forth. Others argue that interior styling is important. Do you have any data or comments on sort of what is important for the younger generations versus older generations?
So when it gets to like the comfort, obviously that then like the seat comfort, that becomes a lot more important to boomers. So Gen Z is definitely gravitating towards those practical brands. And I could see, I don't have data to back this up, but I could see where Gen Z is less concerned about exterior styling, definitely more concerned about does the car have Apple CarPlay? Do I have even things like heads-up display? So I think that things like that become more important than the exterior styling. But I'll have to dig into some data that's really around those features to see if there's differences. But I do kind of buy into that Gen Z is not as concerned with the exterior styling and more concerned about that interior interface, and are they going to be able to, do they have like wireless charging for their phone and things like that. So yeah, I will definitely look into that though.
And I see there's a question way in the back.
Thanks.
Sorry.
This is a great presentation. I was wondering, through the data, are you seeing a correlation between an uptick in car sales when like Uber and Lyft were kind of getting more traction, because now it can be an income resource?
Yeah, I haven't looked at that. So potentially purchasing cars for the purpose of becoming a rideshare driver? Yeah, I have not looked at that, but I will say it always surprises me when somebody like first buys a car and they're like, I'm going to become an Uber driver. I'm like, what? You just got that car? Like all the miles, all the maintenance. So to me, like it definitely doesn't scare younger generations the way it does older generations. But to actually look at sales data, yeah, I'd have to see if I can even get that data. But yeah, that's definitely something to look into.
Sure, yeah, no, just curious.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh,
I've done a couple of Toyota programs where they've talked about the Camry being the #1 car for Gen Z. I'm wondering if you have any data to back that up, and if you think that it might be a lot of it being handoffs, you know, from families to Gen Z parents.
So I'll look at the model level data. I honestly hope that is true because I think the new Camry looks so amazing. But when I say that, to be honest, anybody who's like even millennial to Gen Z like laughs at me. I'm like, no, seriously, have you seen the new Camry? It looks amazing. So every time I see one, I spin my head around. I think it looks so cool. And you know, somebody, a millennial, what I was in a meeting with, even made a joke like driving your grandpa's Camry. I'm like, I'm telling you, you got to look at the Camry today. It looks awesome. So I will look at that data because Toyota was the #1 brand purchased among Gen Z. So I do have model level information. So I'll pull that. Yeah, I can pull that shortly. I'd be interested to know as well. I really hope it's the case because I think it looks awesome.
My sister is barely millennial age, and she's bought her 3rd Camry now.
well, see, okay.
Camry
Here we
was
go.
my first car. Oh no, second. Forgot about the Cutlass Supreme.
Okay, we got another question over here.
All right, so as an active Gen Zer
Yes.
in the crowd,
Yes, let's hear it.
all right, so I know you said that Gen Zers are considering EVs. Are Gen Zers actually purchasing them and also hybrids as well? Because I'm concerned for the earth as well, but I can only afford an ICE vehicle right now. So
What about a used EV though?
That-
Would you consider a used EV? Because that's actually where you're seeing the most, if you're looking for affordable vehicles and you're willing to consider used EVs, at least in the first half of this year, that's where, you know, the cheap cars were sitting basically. So I'm just curious if that would be something you'd consider. And then the other question is, how do you charge it, right?
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I live, because I go to college, I don't have easy access to chargers. I do at home. Like, there's plenty of plugs at home, but when I live in an apartment at school.
Sure,
So,
that's another layer of complication, right? The apartment life, so,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, to answer your question, are Gen Zers buying EVs? The answer is no. No,
All right.
it's definitely higher among boomers. They have high consideration for EVs. They are not buying EVs. I mean, hybrids are definitely a great option. I'll have to look at the data. I hope that those are. I mean, hybrid sales have been skyrocketing the past 2 years now. So I think like hybrid is obviously a nice way to get your toes in the sand. But I agree with Jenny. Like used EVs are definitely an option. Leasing an EV.
Ooh, yeah, that's amazing lease deals on new EVs right now.
Right.
Like crazy prices, the kind of prices that are, you know, 2015. I mean, the numbers are insanely, were insanely low, which is a great, yeah. So that might be the sweet spot too.
Yeah, and you know, to be honest, I'd love to. So I have a lot of EV data, but in my study, I'd like to like go the next level. Like for the Gen Z who's considering EVs, have you looked at an EV? Have you priced an EV? Because I think that there's, you know, the preconceived notion out there that EV is going to cost me $60,000 or more, and you can find affordable EVs. You can find EVs under $40,000. So there are options out there. So I'd be curious to know those that are considering, how far do they take that consideration? Do they actually look at prices before just kind of resigning to EVs are too expensive?
About the charging accessibility though is definitely critical here.
Yeah.
Even as a
Because you make a good point that, like, even as a recent home buyer, like, you're a lot of times you can't even afford a single family home. You know,
Right.
space.
Yeah. Right.
So you might need a townhouse,
Yep.
or a shared community area,
Yeah.
and a lot of HOAs won't allow charging ports unless that becomes more accessible, and it really depends on the state and regulations. Too, like if you go to California, this is much more prevalent, whereas Midwest, you might freak out.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We, as EVs became more prevalent, one of the things that we did at Cars.com is we had level 2 chargers installed in the homes of our car reviewers because we wanted to really be able to speak to that real EV experience, right? The recommendation is you're charging at home. I live in a townhouse in Chicago. My parking spot is half a block. So it's a townhouse. I'm on one end of it. My parking spot is on the other. Chicago, I park in an alley essentially. And I figured there was no way that I could install an EV charger, but it turns out it was just close, it was just far enough away that I was able to install it. It involved trenching through a neighbor's yard. I had to get all 5 of my other townhome neighbors to sign off on it, right? But we did it, which is amazing. So I will say, yes, there are hurdles, but I think it's really important for people who are considering EVs, regardless of your age, right? To find out just what it would take to have an EV charger installed. They might be pleasantly surprised. Another woman who works for me, she also lives in essentially like a townhome community, also Chicago, has an HOA, but was able to talk the HOA into allowing, like updating their guidelines to allow the charger installation. And then that opened the door for other people in her community, which is much bigger than my little townhouse area, to then begin installing EV chargers as well. So, yes, you're right. There are a lot of limitations, apartments, condos, older buildings, alleys, whatever. But I think my takeaway from that is like, ask the question. It's worth it, and charging at home, of course, is the best way to approach it. So, yeah. Anything else? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much. Great questions, great conversation.
Yes.
Thank you.